Are you ready? Awesome. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We're glad that you're here today. This is first of 5 Lunch and Learn webinars through our On Track event that we are partnering with, Iowa College Aid and ICANN are partnering together to offer various virtual events throughout the week, really related to college prep, post-secondary planning, those types of topics. So thank you for joining us. We're excited today to have Mark Salisbury with us from tuitionfit.org. He's going to be talking to us about determining financial fit. So good place to be when you're thinking about price of college, how to make that work within your own life and for your students too. So excited to hear what he's got going on today. And then just some housekeeping items. We are in a Zoom webinar today, so you'll probably notice that your speaking capabilities are kind of shut off. So if you do have questions, do put them in the chat, and I will be sure to kind of interrupt Mark as he's going along and ask those questions. So don't ever hesitate to type that in the chat, and we will definitely see it and keep that conversation moving as you've got questions. What else is on here? We are recording as well, so folks that have registered will receive a recording link, likely tomorrow, to directly access the recording. We will also upload it to YouTube, and your school counselor will receive it next week. So if you're looking for the recording link for any of the sessions, I would say first go out to our YouTube page, and second go to your school counselor to get those links. If you have any issue connecting or trying to get to a recording link, you can always email one of us and we will be happy to get that out to you. And then I'm going to drop a link in our chat right now. And this is the webpage for all of the events going on this week. And you can feel free to glance at those, register for other ones you might be interested in. We are doing some FSAID workshops in the mornings this week. So if you need to get that created, that's a really good spot to join in the morning. And then we've got these ones going. And in the evening, ICANN is hosting kind of a class of each night with an interactive panel. So good things going on all week long. All right, with that, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Jamie, you might want to send that link to everyone and not just the host and panelists. But sorry. Start by calling out and embarrassing your host. Brilliant way to start a presentation. Thankfully, Jamie knows me well enough to know that she could embarrass me probably anytime. So it's great to be here. I'm glad to jump on. And yes, I'm wearing an old Hawkeyes hat because that's where I went to school. So sorry to all of you folks who are elsewhere. We're still licking our wounds from the Saturday before last. So anyway, but it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to join everybody. And I hope after all the storms that came through last night that everybody's okay. I want to talk about determining financial fit. And I'm going to just say that part of what I'm going to communicate here is I'm going to make some assertions and then try to convince you that I'm right. And what that means is you might disagree with something I have to say, or you might even have questions about it. That's the whole idea. So when you have a question or when you have a comment, don't wait, throw it in the chat and we will address it. But I'm going to try to make a case that folks need to make financial fit the #1 first lens that they look at when they start the college search. The college that they go to has to be a financial fit, and that has to be the way they look at everything. Before they start looking at everybody else that matters when you think about a college fit, financial fit has to come first. So that's the stand I'm going to take, and I'm going to try to convince you of it. And I hope somebody will argue with me because, that makes for a fun conversation. Okay, so let's start out by just asking a really sort of obvious question, but maybe not so obvious. What defines educational success after high school? We could think about it in terms of what defines student success in high school, after high school, but student success after high school doesn't necessarily mean to go to college at all. And I'm not one of the folks that says that everybody has to go right to college no matter what, has to be a 4-year school, has to be what. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that the likelihood's pretty high that at some point students are going to need more education than what they got in high school. And that's no dig at the high school. That's just the reality of the world that we're in now. So what would define educational success after high school? Has anyone got any ideas? You want to throw it in the chat? Jamie, you got a thought?
You put me on the spot.
I did. This is my second chance already. It's a question that I think you have thought about a lot, but I think it's a question that a lot of times folks don't think about enough. Like, what defines success here? Because a lot of times we forget about what the long-term goal is when we start talking about college. A lot of times it's really easy to sort of say, well, the next step is going to college. So going to college becomes the proxy for all the other goals that we really think are the ones that are most important, but we sort of end up just focusing on going to college. And I'm going to argue that it's not just going to college. And by the way, when I say college, imagine in that the biggest pot possible, right? 4-year school, 2-year school, coding boot camp, apprenticeships, all that stuff. Just put it all into that big pot. Going on to something else where you're learning, and learning is a sort of key function of that next experience. But I'm going to argue that it's the goal has to be that the definition of educational success has to be more than just going to whatever that educational thing is, right? It's not just that you started at the University of Iowa or Northern Iowa or something. It's more than that. And I'm going to argue it's not just finishing college either. These are actually accurate drawings of me at the beginning of college and then at the end of college. And for those of you, just so you know, like, I took 7 years to finish undergrad. Started full-time, transferred once, transferred again, stopped out part-time, then back to full-time. So I did all of that stuff. I'm a good example of, it's not a straight line, right? But I'm going to argue that it's not just finishing college either, because we got a lot of people who finished, but didn't quite get what they had hoped to get because they finished. I'm going to argue that it really takes two things, and it's got to be all of this. First of all, the students got to learn and grow. During college, whatever it is, you don't just show up, punch the clock and do the least bit you can do to get by. You got to really make something out of that. And the students are the ones that define whether that's going to happen. It's not the colleges that necessarily define it. And for those of you who sort of think about this stuff more in depth, this is one of these difficult transitions for high school students going to college. Is oftentimes the way that college operates is kind of different from the way high school operates. And that the student in college really does have to be the one that makes their learning happen and engages in that experience. But the second thing is they have to graduate, and I'm going to put it right out there, with no financial constraints. They have to graduate with no financial constraints. If we don't get number 2 to happen, I'm going to argue that's not educational success. You can go to college, but if you don't finish, and you don't finish you finish with no financial constraints, like, we don't have those two things happen, we haven't hit success. Because today, the biggest constraint that we have across millions and millions of people, and everybody, you have to have been hiding under a very large pile of hay to not know that student debt is a pretty big issue these days. The biggest constraint is the debt that students graduate from college with. So even though they learned and grew, and they went to college, and they graduated, they end up graduating into a world in which there's a ton of debt. And they are on the hook for that debt. And sometimes their parents are on the hook for that debt too. And that sets up a scenario in which they don't get to be able to pursue whoever it is that they've become in their 4 years of college. Because a lot of students, when they go to college, they have a certain sense of who they're going to be. When they graduate, it's not that. They've changed their major, they've grown as a person, they've developed in all kinds of ways. And when they graduate from college, what your hope is that they can go and pursue who they have become. They've discovered that they want to be a school counselor. They've discovered that they want to be a teacher. They've discovered that they want to help people in some other way. Or they've discovered that they want to pursue some other track that includes graduate school. But the financial constraints they're under because of the debt that they have accumulated makes it impossible for them to pursue that goal. And that is what I mean by financial constraints. And we see it all the time today. So a successful college search means that the cost of the school has to fit the student's price range. It has to fit the student's price range, whatever that is. And we'll talk about different factors that can shape whatever that price range might be. And then the student maximizes the value that they can get out of that college experience. The student is the one that goes in and makes the difference. And instead of just punching the clock. So I'm going to start by just saying right out of the gate, a successful college search means you have to find colleges that fit the price range. And if you're not doing that, the student goes to a school that doesn't fit their price range, we're automatically not going to have educational success.
Mark, can I interrupt you?
Of course.
So when I think about this, I'm wondering how, and you might hit on this, so I apologize if this is early, how a person determines their price range when they don't know what their financial aid offer is.
That's a great question. And you're right. That's one of the things I'm going to dive into later.
Cool.
And I sort of set all this up, and I appreciate you sort of voicing that, because I guarantee you that at least half the people who are listening to us right now are asking that same question, because the college search process is set up in such a way that makes it really hard to do that. Because how do we usually start the college search? We start it by comparing colleges. That's what people have been told for decades. Well, how do you start your college search? Well, you start by going out and looking at colleges. And you can find all kinds of information on colleges. Tons of it. It's a big school, it's a small school, it's close to you, it's far away. It's got old buildings, it's got new buildings. It's got this major, that major. It's got study abroad, it's got a climbing wall. It's got, like all these different things that they've got. And it's really easy to get into a pretty, go deep down a rabbit hole, thinking about all the different factors that might define one college over another. There's lots of tools out there that you can go to and run all kinds of searches of, I want this kind of college, or I want this kind of college. And the way that the college search works is that you get hung up picking all that stuff. And it's not until much, much later that you find out that the one college for you is $10,000 a year and the other one's $30,000 a year. And had you known that at the beginning, you wouldn't have wasted any of your time looking at the school that was 30, because it wasn't even close to what you could afford. That's kind of the way that this system is set up. And when people do that, and this is how we've gotten into the space that we're in, when people do that, they end up swooning over schools. And that's not terrible to fall in love with a place. Nothing wrong with that. But the system is designed so that people are attracted to schools by lots of features, fall in love with a place. Can you see yourself there? Like all these different questions that get used. And what ends up then is people end up paying more for a college than they had planned on, that they wanted to, hence the borrowing that occurs. And we're right back to the debt issue that we talked about before. And this is where I'm going to assert that in order to accomplish this, in order to accomplish starting with making sure that your cost meets your price range, you have to approach the college search different, and you have to use a couple of different tools to do it. And you have to start by asking a different set of questions. The first step in determining financial fit, I argue, start with your student, not with the colleges. Don't even talk about the colleges yet. Start with your student. Start by asking your student this set of questions. First, got 2 minutes up there. How much support will you need in college? Be honest. This is a really important question to start with students. And if you're a parent of a student, or you're a student yourself, or you're a school counselor working with a student, there may need to be some conversation and reflection about the right answer to this, what's an accurate answer. But how much support will you need in college? Because not every college provides the same level of support. Not every college is designed to provide the same degree of support. And not every student needs the same set of supports. There's some students that can go into any environment and they'll figure it out. And we all know students like that. And then there are other students that really have some important needs that need to be met to help them manage in a new environment. And then some students just need to have somebody who will kick them in the pants and get them to class. And if you're imagining a male face, okay, that's probably kind of accurate because it's more the thing for male students than female students. But all of this is true. Different kinds of different students need different levels of support and different degrees of support in college. The reason why I put this question absolutely first is because if the student is the kind of student that takes initiative, super persistent, an amazing problem solver, then that student can end up that student can go to an institution that is massive, far away, doesn't have all of the systems in place to support students, and that student's much more likely to be fine. But if there's a young person that really needs a support system, then you need to make sure that the school you're looking at, let's take, for example, a student that's really introverted and really unsure about being away and really unsure about being in a space with lots of people they don't know. Well, then that means that that student's going to need a different kind of environment. And that's why I start with this question. Let's start with, what kind of support system does the student need? Does the student have clear goals for life after college? Lots of students don't, and it's totally fine. But it is important to know if the student has a very clear sense of where they want to go with their life after college. And I don't mean picking a major. This is something that's very different from just picking a major. But they have a clear sense that this student really wants to pursue something in the sciences, in the biological sciences. Maybe it's doctor, maybe it's researcher, but you know the student really wants to do that, okay? Versus if the student really has no idea, like, you know the difference between students that really do have some sense of where they're going to end up directionally, and students who really are all over the place. And the student that when you ask them what they're going to major in college, they just give you a major, and then they start listing like 4 or 5 others. And then it's basically like, yeah, really, I have no idea. I don't even know what that means, picking a major per se. I don't even know what that is. That's a really valuable question, just to ask and answer that one, because that shapes this conversation we're going to have in a second about determining what's a reasonable price range. If you have a goal, will it require graduate school? This is a really good question to follow up after the first one, especially if a student says they want to do something, they really do kind of want to go into biological sciences, for example. Because more and more professions, it's not just nice to have a graduate degree, you actually have to have one. Those of you who sort of not paid attention at all to the health sciences over the past 20 years might be blown away to know that to be a physical therapist, you actually have to have a PhD. in physical therapy. Like it's a whole nother world than just like getting a major in physical therapy and then going. The profession has changed dramatically. So it's really important to know. And the reason to ask this question is because it's going to cost a bunch of money to go to graduate school, right? And so you're not just talking about spending some money on undergrad, you're talking about money for graduate school too. And yes, there are some graduate programs where you have assistantships and people can get their school paid for, but that's not the case with med school. That's not the case with law school. That's not the case with lots of different graduate programs out there. So again, just starting to ask these questions to get a sense of where the student is. And remember, if it's totally possible for the student to say, one, I don't have a clear goal. And since I don't have a clear goal, yeah, I might like graduate school, or don't get me near a graduate school. I don't even really want to go to college, like, but I know I got to go, right? All of those answers are really useful here. There's been some really interesting research on what high school students think their starting salaries will be after college. Turns out students generally think that their starting salaries will be about double what they actually are. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. For obvious reasons, right? Like students, if they think they're going to be making twice what they actually will be making on average, then the likelihood of them saying, oh, spend it all, woohoo, is a lot higher. And I don't know about you, but I have seen 17-year-olds, every once I've seen 17-year-olds that are not great with money. I don't know about you, but just, throwing that out there. And it's not because they're bad kids. It's just conceptually the whole notion of interest rates and compounding interest and what's going to happen to me 6 years down the road. It's just not something that they're able to sort of pull together at this point. They're 17, right? So knowing what a reasonable starting salary to expect might be is really valuable to know the difference between going into engineering versus going into teaching. And not to suggest that every student should be an engineer because it pays more. No, not at all. But just knowing what that starting salaries generally are for that profession or those goals, even if you just narrow it down to the student knows they're probably not going to go into the sciences, they're probably going to be something in the humanities. That's where they tend to have their natural sort of aptitudes just sit in the area of reading and writing and thinking about ideas. And they don't click with lab and science and physics and whatever. Even if you know that much, you can still know that students that graduate in the humanities, average salaries tend to be in this range. Students who graduate in the hard sciences tend to be in this range. Understand that there's a range on either side of the average, but just understand what's a reasonable starting salary to expect, only because what you're trying to do here is help the student and maybe the family too, not be completely off the rails. And honestly, at this point, that's the biggest thing you're protecting from, is trying to help people just not go and be, really off the rails in terms of thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to make $100,000 a year as a teacher right out of college. Yeah, it's no problem. It'll be great. And then they find out, no, that's not how it works. Lastly, and this gets to that question of price range, what can your family afford before borrowing for college? Setting aside the borrowing, you may borrow, you might not borrow. I'm not somebody who says like you should never borrow ever. Sometimes it's okay to borrow to pay for college. It's really important to be careful that you don't borrow too much, because that's the problem that lots of people have gotten into. But setting that aside for a second, just as a family, as a student, what's a reasonable amount that a student can afford? Now, to answer that question, it's really important that you start having conversations about, honest conversations about money, because that's the stuff that you have to talk about in order to get to this. And this is where I think there's a couple of things underneath here that are really important to know. First of all, 60 years of research on adult success and college student success tells us the same thing. It just doesn't really matter where you go to college. What matters is what you do while you're in college, and then what you do when you're out of college as an adult. So the brand name of the school, the amount that you might think you should pay, doesn't actually correlate with potential for success. What does correlate with potential for success, though, is how much debt you have. So the more debt the student has, the harder it is for them to get themselves out of that first couple of years of school, because they're under a lot of water. So it's really important right out of the gate, while you're talking about colleges, talk about the college search. What can the student afford? Now, it's also really important just to answer a couple of things in here. And I'm going to talk about them as I go through here, but here's a couple of things that if you hear these answers, these should be like major red flags. If a student comes back with, or a family, oh no, I'll be fine. It'll be good. Like, I'll join a Greek organization and all my friends will help me out. Or every college has advisors. Probably worth a pretty important conversation at that point. Major choice is the same as goals after college. I mentioned this before, but it really isn't. There's some really interesting research on this, and it just shows how the degree to which what people majored in and then what professions they are in 10, 15 years after college, it's really all over the place. It's amazingly all over the place, and much more so than I think a lot of people think. If the student and the family really thinks that the name of the school they go to is going to define their success, that's a hard one to break, because that's what our society's been telling people forever. And let's not kid ourselves. Colleges enjoy that too, right? Like, they market themselves like crazy because they want to be the ones that have the reputation and prestige, because that's how you'll decide which schools you decide to look at, as students do. But again, 60 years of research says the same thing. The name of the school just doesn't define success afterwards. It just doesn't. I'll make plenty of money right out of college. I have heard a lot of high school seniors say that. I've heard a lot of college freshmen say, oh yeah, I'll be fine. I'll be making tons of money. It'll be great. And they've never taken a financial literacy course. They couldn't begin to tell you how the bank account works if they have one, but they're sure this will work. They're just sure of it. And it's really important. Again, everything behind all this is about helping people have an honest understanding of what they're going into, right? And then the last one is, there's lots of scholarships out there. And it's true. There's lots of private scholarship money. There's lots of institutional scholarship money that institutions award. But just because there's lots of scholarship money out there doesn't mean that your student will get it. There's a big difference between sort of saying big picture versus individual student picture. And the fact of the matter is, for private scholarships, that most of them are reasonably, they're small compared to the price of college, right? Most of them are $500, $1,000, $2,000, and that's great. It's 1 year, and when the college is asking you to pay $25,000, that doesn't get you all the way there. The second thing is that there are an awful lot of schools that engage in something called scholarship displacement, where when you bring in a private scholarship to that school then says, thank you very much. We are going to now subtract that same number from the institutional aid we gave you, from the scholarship package we awarded you. So now you're right back to where you started. And the student doesn't usually find out about that until after the school year started. So it's not a real pretty thing. It's really important people understand that throughout all of these things, when students or families say, like, no, it'll be fine, don't worry, it'll work out, we'll make it work, that is the answer that should set off all the alarms, because that's how we got into this place as a country. That's how we got into this place with our student debt problem, is that people said, well, it'll just be fine. It'll work out. Don't worry. They didn't think about financial fit. They just went through the college search process. After you assess your student, after you've had some of these honest conversations, then you can start looking at colleges. Because now you have a framework to start being able to say, all right, this college, no, it's not going to work. This college, yeah, it might work, because it ticks the boxes of it's going to be in our price range or versus it's not. Now, I just mentioned it's going to be in our price range, and it ought to have rung the bell in the back of your head that Jamie asked earlier, like, are you going to talk about how to figure out the schools that are in your price range? Yes, I'm holding on to that because it's kind of the secret sauce of this whole thing, right? But it's really important that every family everybody understand with clarity the harsh reality that is the college admissions marketplace. And somebody might say, well, the harsh reality, that's too harsh of a word to use. Harsh. Sorry. I'm not sure how else to put it, but this is a reality that everybody needs to understand. And the first is that this is a marketplace that everybody's entering into. And in a marketplace, two things are always true. One is that the consumer wants to find the best value they can find. In other words, however they decide that algorithm, that metric, that calculus to get to value, they want value, which means that they paid relatively less for more, right? You got a good deal on something. Even if it was a Porsche, you still you got a good deal on it, right? Like that's still something, and you can justify that in your head however you want, but the consumer is always looking for value. But in a marketplace, the sellers, the organizations that are selling the product, they're not first going out there by trying to help you get the best price. They're trying to get you to pay as much as they can get you to pay. This is not because people are evil. It's just because that's how marketplaces work. And it's really important to understand when you walk into this process that colleges are selling a product. They're trying to keep the lights on, and they would love it if you would pay relatively more to come to their school, because that helps them keep the lights on and pay faculty more and do all the things that they want to do. That's the thing you're entering into. And the way that the system is designed right now is that, yes, you start with a whole ton of colleges, thousands of them, and the one thing you won't be able to find out is what's your price. There are some ways to fix that, to get around that are out there, some better than others. I'll talk about those in a second. But basically, the longstanding approach here has been, for the last several decades, go pick some colleges that you just feel good about. We'll talk about price later. Then you narrow your list to schools that you focus in on. You might go visit some campuses, meet with some admissions counselors at a college fair, whatever it is. But when you ask their price, they'll tell you, look, we got tons of scholarships. You seem like a great student. Wonderful. They'll tell you there's a lot of money, but again, you won't find out your actual price. And that matters in an environment where the sticker price is $60,000 at a private school, $25,000 at a public school, and a $5,000 swing around what price they actually offer you is the difference between whether you can afford it or not. Then you get to your final list and you send in your applications. You still don't know what your price is. It's not until you get to the acceptance letter, and then hopefully soon after that, that you find out your actual price. And the problem for most people is that if they ran this process in a way where they just went and looked at schools and didn't care about price or didn't bother to look, the schools that they've decided to apply to end up all charging them relatively more than they had wanted to pay. But now that they're at the end of this process, their range of options is pretty small. Those thousands of colleges that were out there at the beginning, or that list of 25 schools that might be possible, that ship sailed, they think. And so now I've got 4 colleges. 3 of them are asking me to pay $20,000 a year more than what I can afford. One of them is asking me to pay $5,000 more than I really want to pay. Well, I guess I'll take that one and we'll borrow a bunch more. That's how this marketplace typically works for people. And it's designed this way. Or maybe I should say, it has evolved this way. So this is why when we talk about financial fit first, it's so critical that you start with actual price and you only consider the colleges that fit your price range. Now, starting with actual price means a couple of things. It both means you need to figure out what's your price range, and then you need to find the schools that match that. So let's talk about how to match college costs with price range. First, do an EFC estimator long before it's time to do the Fafsa. We got 2 acronyms in here that some of you know and some of you don't, and I probably need to explain some of this. All right, so let's back up. First, the Fafsa, the free application for federal student aid. If you haven't heard about it, Jamie will come to your house and tell you about it. Oh, that's not quite true. Somebody will tell you about it. And if they don't, I will. Everybody needs to understand what this is. This is the forms that the federal government offers that essentially colleges use to help shape their sense of how much money they think you ought to be able to pay for college. That's how this plays out. Now, what it also does is it determines if the student and the family qualifies for any need-based aid that comes from the federal government, and oftentimes in many states can come from the states. So if your FAFSA result meets a certain threshold or is below a certain threshold, then you qualify for a bunch of aid from the federal government to go to college. So the FAFSA is this document that it's this thing you got to fill out. It's in the process of getting a little simpler. And one of the nicest tricks about it now is that you can automatically link it with tax returns. So you don't have to fill it out as if you're just copying from your tax return now. It can just pull from the tax return. Or I should say one more thing. If you want to be able to borrow from the federal government, any of the direct student loans from the federal government, which are oftentimes, if you're going to borrow, really the first place you should go because the interest rates are a lot lower and there's a whole bunch of other protections that are there that don't exist in the private loans. Even if you don't qualify for need-based aid like a Pell Grant, you still have to fill out the FAFSA. So if a family doesn't fill out the FAFSA, even if they're well above the threshold for a Pell Grant, they still won't get offered any of that federal aid. So those federal loans. So filling out the FAFSA is something that everyone should do, and it opens up beginning of October. The student who's a senior in high school and planning on going to college the next year, that's when you start to fill it out. Do it in October. Don't have to do it on day 1 of October, but do it in October, and then you just get it done and it's out of the way. So what's the EFC? Well, the EFC, it stands for expected family contribution. The EFC is essentially the result of completing the FAFSA. The FAFSA does this algorithm underneath, and then it produces this number that the federal government has called for a very long time, the expected family contribution. And you've probably heard about this. There was legislation passed a couple of years ago. The EFC is going to be relabeled in a couple of years. So it's called the Student Aid Index, which is probably a little bit more accurate terminology for what the EFC has come to represent for colleges and universities for a very long time. It's essentially a way for every college to put that individual student on a spectrum from has absolutely no money to pay for college on their own to has lots and lots of money to pay for college on their own. Set aside for a second that the EFC is the formula has some problems and lots of criticisms of it. Set that aside for a second, but just know that fill out the FAFSA when the student's a senior in high school. The result is the EFC. So why do I say do an EFC estimator long before it's time to do the FAFSA? The reason is when a college accepts a student, and now that student's been accepted by the admissions office, that student's file goes over to the financial aid office. And the financial aid office is the office where they assign a price to that student. And one of the things that they look at is that student's academic profile, what oftentimes gets called merit. But that's only one of the two factors that drive price. The other one is that student's need or perception of that student's need, and the perception of that student's needs represented by the EFC that came from the FAFSA. So the reason to know this number way ahead of actually filling out the FAFSA is because that's how colleges are going to think about what price do we assign the student. And if you know that ahead of time, you can start to use that information to really help you find the colleges that are going to fit whatever price range you decide that you want to fit your costs within, right? So a lot of folks just don't even touch this until they get to senior year and it's October or December and they fill out the FAFSA. Then they see this EFC number that comes out and they fall out of their chair because this EFC is a number that they're like, there's no way we have that amount of money to pay for college. Yes, that's the problem with that formula. Is not really an accurate representation of what a family can actually pay very often, but it's the number that the colleges use. So once that number gets in front of the schools, because you shared it with them as a part of the application process, now they're looking at that, and it would have been really nice to know what that number was going to be a long time ago, because it can really help you. Jamie just put in the chat a link to another EFC calculator that is also quite good. There's a lot of them that are quite good. I recommend finaid.org primarily because it's simple. It doesn't ask all the questions. It just sort of takes the big data points to give you a ballpark number. The folks at Big Future have done a really good job of going a lot more into detail. So you'll get a much more precise number from them, but it's a longer form too. So either one is going to be really helpful. But the point is, if you know this number ahead of time, you can really then use that to think about, okay, how is this college going to perceive me? Another way to think about this is you already know what your students' unweighted high school GPA is, I hope, right? And you have that GPA in your mind because you know that's what the college is going to use to sort of assess the other factor of evaluating your student. And you know that there's merit aid out there that schools oftentimes give based on that GPA that's going to shape the ultimate price that students has to pay. Just think of this as like the financial GPA. So there's the school GPA and then there's the EFC. It's those two metrics that influence how the college chooses what price that college chooses to assign to a student after they've accepted that student. So knowing this stuff ahead of time is super important, because otherwise you'll never be able to sort of find a way to fit your own price range to what that college's actual cost for your type of student would be. So start with this. Secondly, build an honest budget for college. As a student, as a family, as a counselor helping that student, they need to be able to do this. This is why more and more high schools around the country and more students around the country, even if the high school doesn't offer it, are really sinking their teeth into building some financial literacy. Part of what has gotten so many students in so much financial trouble as a function of their college expenses is the fact that they had no financial literacy going in. They had no idea how loan interest can balloon when they make one choice versus another choice. So if you have those resources at your high school, or if you as a student, if you can go online and find a whole bunch of free resources to help develop some financial literacy and build an honest budget. But it is super important to have that conversation. Now, when you're doing this exercise as a family, a couple of things that are really important to keep in the mix. Yes, if you have as a family saved some money for college, that's great. And there's some really important things to talk about with where you've put that money and how you've saved it. That I can't go into in depth here, but there's some great resources about looking into how you organize that money, because when you fill out the FAFSA, some money is counted in some ways and some money is counted in different ways. But when you build that budget, you've got some money set aside for college, great. But also include in there, if your family's gonna be gonna qualify for Pell Grant money, or it's gonna qualify for any other state aid, knowing that then ahead of time, which again, why you do the EFC estimator long before you get to the FAFSA, then allows you to build that into the budget. So if you're going to qualify for a Pell Grant, for example, that's $6,000 a year. So put that in the budget, because now you know that that's going to be there. Same is true for the student works a summer job or works part-time in college, which lots of students work part-time in college and still do great in college. And there's actually some research that says that working an appropriate amount in college may actually be helpful, because it helps in terms of time management, it helps in terms of developing some of the skills the student's going to need after college. But build that into the budget if you plan to work. If the student is planning on going into engineering and knows they're going to have to spend every minute of their time studying, well, then you know not to build that in during the school year. But build an honest budget for college. And just be honest about it, because that will really make a huge difference. Then, now you've got a sense of, if you built that honest budget, so you know, okay, as a family, we can come up with X number of dollars for college per year. And we know that the schools are going to see us as having Y EFC. I'm just going to pick some numbers because it's easier than saying X and Y. Let's say you've done the EFC estimator, and the EFC estimator says $10,000 is your EFC. Your family's EFC is $10,000. So you're not going to qualify for any Pell Grants. But if your EFC is $10,000, you're absolutely a family that can't just write a check for a college sticker price tomorrow, not even close. You're probably very much making sure that finances work every month. That's like most Americans. So you know that the college is going to see that EFC, and that's going to be their 10,000 EFC. You build your family budget. You say, okay, well, you know what? We can come up with $6,000 a year for college, combining a summer job and some other money that we've got saved away, maybe carving a little bit of our income. The money that we were spending on food for our growing child, we can now put that into, okay. So we can come up with 6,000. You might start saying right here, well, wait a minute, the EFC is larger than college. Well, we can't do this. There's no way. The actual answer is, you can absolutely make college work, even if the EFC is larger than what you think your budget can be, because the actual prices that college charge are affected by both the EFC and academic merit. So there are a couple of resources, and I'm going to highlight 2 Iowa companies that are actually really good, and full disclosure, I run one of them, where you can actually find colleges that we know fit your price range and not the sticker price. One small point that actually matters a lot. College sticker prices, by and large, nobody actually pays them. The latest data, 1 in 10 college students is actually paying the sticker price to go to a college or university. And most of the students that are paying that sticker price are paying it at private, more affluent schools and their families that are relatively well off. But otherwise, 9 out of 10 students are paying less than the sticker price. And across the whole country, that average that people are actually paying can be half what that sticker price is. Now, there's a lot of variation there, but my point is, I hope you're already seeing that you can have this EFC that might be 10,000. You might have a family budget for 6,000. But it's pretty likely that you're going to find schools by using either Tuition Fit or College Raptor that if your academics are reasonably strong, that you'll find schools that would actually charge closer to your actual price range, despite what your EFC is. And those tools, tuitionfit.org, College Raptor, I think is .com, both help you find the schools that fit your price range. Tuition Fit does it because we've got tens of thousands of offers that students have actually received and then shared with us. So it's like a giant Kelly Blue Book. College Raptor does it with an algorithm that predicts based on a whole bunch of public data and some other proprietary data that they collect and gives a prediction of what your price would be. And in both cases, you're going to be able to find a set of schools that fit the price range that you've set, given the realities of your EFC and given the realities of your high school GPA, your academic, your merit, and your need matrix. So you can use these tools to find schools that fit your price range and build your list that way. And then you set yourself in a position where all the colleges that you're looking at fit the price range that you've had, and makes this a much simpler equation that doesn't get you in the position of being compelled to borrow far more than you have to borrow. Here's some concerns that are behind these questions that I posted that a lot of people have. When they get asked about the Fafsa, well, I don't want to share any private information. And the Fafsa asks me to fill out a bunch of stuff. Or I'm not going to qualify for a Pell Grant anyway, so why bother? A couple of things. One is, I hate to say it, but your information, privacy ship sort of sailed a long time ago. But the federal government already has all that information in your tax return. So it's not like you are going to be sharing a whole bunch of information that they don't already have. More to the point, though, just completing the Fafsa is the only way to qualify, the only way to even be in the ballpark for some of the, or essentially all of, the federal student loans. And if you're going to borrow, that's the first place you want to go to from borrowing. You don't want to start with private loans. You want to start with the federal loans. So you have to fill out the Fafsa to do that. The other thing that, if you want to qualify for a Pell Grant or any of the other state-based grants, you're going to need to fill out the Fafsa. And this is another reason why doing an EFC estimator a year ahead of time, well, one, it starts to tell you, well, what's the kind of information that I really do need to share? And you start to find out that, oh yeah, it's really not that much more than they already have anyways. But two, if you do an EFC estimator a year in advance, then you can start to spend some time figuring out, is there ways for us to optimize our family finances so that the EFC comes down? And I'll tell you one of them just right now. If a family saved a bunch of money for college for their student, and they've just put it in a savings account that is in the student's name, that money is going to then need to be reported on the Fafsa, and it's going to inflate the EFC. If you take that same money and have it in a grandparent's account, that money doesn't get counted in the same way. Now, there's details to this that you want to ask people who have expertise in this area that do it all the time. But the point is that you actually have some control over your EFC. And if you know that early enough, you can actually do something about it. But I wanted to sort of get out there in front when people say, well, I don't want to fill out the FAFSA because I don't want to share my private information. I think it's useful to be able to have an answer to respond to that. This is the second one we see a lot. Our family, we just don't talk about money. We haven't told our kids what our price range is, what we can afford, what we can't. And we're afraid that if we tell them, it's going to disappoint them. And as parents, and I'm a parent, you want to do right by your kids and you don't want to ever break their heart and everything else. But the way to deal with that isn't by just not talking about money, because family after family after family and student after student after student has gone down this road where they didn't talk about the money until the prices came out. And then all of a sudden the family said, oh, we can't afford that. And so then the student didn't go to college at all. Or the family has tremendous fights about money that creates a horrible dynamic that nobody wants to experience. So it makes a lot more sense to be upfront about finances right out of the gate, because then you can have the honest conversation about, let's look at the colleges that fit our price range. What's our price range? Here's our price range, and here's how we came to that. And finally, you'll hear about this if you haven't already, of course. There's these things called the net price calculators. They're on college and universities' websites. And sometimes they're very accurate. Sometimes they're not as accurate. And it's really hard to know which schools are accurate, which ones aren't. Now, one of the reasons they're not accurate is because a family will fill them out without really knowing what the questions mean, because oftentimes the questions sound a lot like the questions that you would complete in a FAFSA or an EFC calculator. So if you've already done an EFC calculator, you're going to be a lot closer to ending up with an accurate calculation. But the other problem here is that you have to go to individual colleges you've already heard of in order to find the net price calculator, because you wouldn't know about what you don't know about, right? So net price calculators, by no means should you just ignore them. But what I would suggest is start with Tuition Fit or start with College Raptor, then go from there to those colleges, dig a little bit further, and use their net price calculator to see if the numbers match up. And if they do, that tells you something. And if they don't, that tells you something. But that's how you could use the net price calculators. So use that in the process of diving further, but after you've already used other tools to figure out which colleges are the right fit financially. Last thing I'll say, and I will say this over and over to my last breath. The goal for all of our students is accomplished after they graduate from college. It's not during, and it's not when they get accepted to a school. It's after. So we have to play the long game with all of our students. And we have to help them, and we have to help the families remember this. They send their student off to college and the student has a miserable time and quits or transfers. That's a fail. And if they drop out and they have a bunch of debt, that's a double fail, because now they got the debt they still got to pay off, but they got no degree to then help them get a job that would pay for that debt. So please remember, the goal for the students is accomplished after graduating from college, and we have to help them be on track that best positions them to be able to graduate. So, any questions that anybody has? Jamie's thrown a couple of really helpful tools into the chat. Thank you, Jamie, for Google searching and cutting and pasting like a pro. Seriously, wonderful. Thank you so much. This is a great worksheet, by the way, that Jamie put in here that can really help you start comparing prices, which is another thing a Tuition Fit does. It helps you compare prices after you've gotten award letters.
Mark, there was one question about Tuition Fit. Is it free to use, or is there a price?
Tuition Fit is mostly free. And I say mostly because I'm being transparent, because that's kind of how we work. you can go to Tuition Fit long before you have an award letter to share, just to get basic sense of what schools would be in a price range. There is a free version there. There is a premium version that costs $50 one time. To be frank, 9 times out of 10, you don't need the premium version, because all you're trying to do at that point is just give me a list of schools that fit my price range. And that just requires that the student plugs in a GPA and an EFC, and then you've got a price range slider that you can set, and then you get the list of schools that we know are in your price range. So that part's free. And then when you get to the point of having award letters to share and decode what the actual price is, and then compare them across other offers that other students are getting, that's totally free.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm skimming through the chat to make sure I didn't miss any questions, but I think
We are right at 1 o'clock, so amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for joining us and sharing your expertise. I always appreciate hearing from you. And if we had a little more time, I might ask you some questions, but we do have to get going, just because our afternoon is stacked here at Iowa College Aid. But
awesome.
Thank you everybody else for joining us. Hopefully you've taken some really great nuggets of information from this webinar. Determining financial fit is really big deal as far as affordability goes, and very, very important to consider when you're looking at colleges and starting to consider that pathway. So again, thank you, Mark, for being here to help us through that process. I feel like every time I hear you talk, I learn something new, and something else to consider as far as financial fit goes. So I appreciate you being here today. Let's see. And then lastly, I will drop this link in the chat one more time. If you're looking for other sessions to attend this week, feel free to stop by this webpage and see what else we've got going on throughout the week. We've got a lunch and learn webinar like this happening every day, different topics, and then our FSAID workshops in the morning, 7 to 8 a.m. will be in there to help you create that. So if you're looking to get that completed, that'd be a good time to help to join. And then just to follow up, we will send out a recording link to those that registered today. It's likely you'll get it tomorrow. And then if from there, you'll be able to get it from your school counselor as well. But with that, enjoy your afternoon, everybody. And we will get moving. But if you've got questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out to Iowa College Aid. We're here to help you.